All right, I'm going to try to do that whole walk backwards slowly thing. This is inevitably going to end up in a broken hip or something because I'm elderly. But, if I'm about to walk into an alligator or something, let me know, please. By all means. Although if I die, don't you guys all get an A automatically? Wasn't that the plot of some movie? All right, so we were talking about carrying capacity, managerial carrying capacity in particular, at the very end of last Thursday's class session. So again, there's physical carrying capacity. How many bodies of whatever organism we're talking about, in our case humans, can we stuff into a space physically? There's not a ton of carrying capacity along a rock climbing route. There's a lot of carrying capacity, physical carrying capacity, in Campus Lake. We could fit something like 60, 70,000 people in Campus Lake, and we sort of like slotted everybody in, and everybody was like nose to nose, like way inside of everybody's interpersonal space radius. Okay? So, physical carrying capacity. Biological carrying capacity, how many of that organism can the landscape support in terms of food habitat, cover habitat from predators, breeding and rearing habitat for the youths, and so on and so forth, right? So pick the lowest number across all of those subtypes of biological carrying capacity. That's sort of the range around which you're going to build your understanding of biological carrying capacity for any particular place or habitat. For us, that habitat is going to be a park or forest or other protected area like we talked about on Thursday. Our third kind of carrying capacity, just as a quick review, is social carrying capacity. So, how many people can we have in that classroom we're in before the number of people starts to take focus or quality away from what you're there in the classroom to do? In that case, it's like, learn stuff, pick up certifications over several years, get a job doing forestry stuff eventually. For Campus Lake, the social carrying capacity, even if it were mystically somehow the same space or volume as that classroom, which has a physical or safety carrying capacity of about 70 students. If Campus Lake had some 70-person physical capacity, the social carrying capacity would probably be something less than that, right? So if we're at Campus Lake to walk around and have a good time, stretch our legs, get some exercise, maybe push ourselves to our sort of aerobic capacity kind of thing, like go after the challenge of it instead of just some fresh air sort of thing, right? Each one of those different reasons for being around Campus Lake has some social carrying capacity number sort of loosely associated with it, loosely coupled. Like, you can't have a good walk around the lake or a good jog around the lake if you're constantly carving the meat pylons, as bike messengers say, constantly having to weave in between other people to get to where you're going because they're going a different direction or different speed than you are. And after a while, it's like, man, I'm spending more energy dodging people than I am spending energy on enjoying this jog or this walk or whatever. Okay, so that's social carrying capacity. How many people is too many people in terms of kind of feeling crowded? It's a subjective number that's going to be a little bit different for everybody, right? If we ask each one of you, how many people is too many people in our classroom for you to be able to learn effectively? We're probably going to get a slightly different number for everybody. Some people just really function better in a small classroom setting where we have 15 students and one professor. Other students kind of like the anonymity of a big lecture hall style classroom, and there might be 150, 200, 500 people in a big lecture hall classroom like that. That way you can scroll Instagram the whole time while the professor's yammering on and get double duty for your time spent. Nice. But that number is just going to be different for everybody. Social carrying capacity. Managerial carrying capacity, where we're picking up the conversation today, is a little bit more kind of meta versus the other three. The other three are eventually numbers or ranges that you figure out, right? X number of wildebeests on the African veldt before they eat all their grassoid species and there's no more food left and their population collapses, right? Over carrying capacity. For managerial carrying capacity, though, it's not a number like that. It is, how does your decision or set of decisions or history of decisions as the land manager, as a park ranger in our case, how do those decisions and the effects of those decisions and the interactions of those decisions tune those other three carrying capacities up, making a place have more capacity, or tune those numbers downward, degrading or reducing or lowering the carrying capacity physically or biologically or what have you. So, one example of management carrying capacity or managerial carrying capacity here for the Campus Lake Path is the very real dollars and cents decision of what surface do we want this path to be. It could be poured concrete like this, which has a lifespan of 10 to 50 years here in the temperate southern Midwest. We could do something like asphalt, tar and chip as it's called, which is what the path switches to further on up ahead. It's a lot cheaper than pouring concrete and maintaining concrete. Concrete is really expensive relative to just tar and chip, which we just kind of crap out in a strip along the surface of the planet, and you can walk and drive over that. Most of our roads are tar and chip. But we don't get 50 years out of a segment of road or trail that is covered in tar and chip. So it's a lot cheaper, but you got to spend that cheaper amount. How often do you see roads repaired around where you come from? Maybe often up in Chicago, or it should be often, but they don't?
Not often enough.
Not often enough? Yeah. Most of our roads are tar and chip, so we get used to providing jobs to lots of people in terms of grinding that asphalt or tar and chip road surface off, squirting it back out with a whole bunch of fresh tar, and recycling those stone chips. And we get a freshly surfaced road. It's good for 3, 4, 5 years, something like that. And then the potholes get so bad, you gotta scrape it all off and do it again. And we've all been through traffic many times enough to understand what the cost is in terms of your time and your car's or truck's suspension getting busted on some of those Chicago potholes versus paying a lot more for concrete. Okay? So, a third kind of surface we could have for our Campus Lake Path is soil or dirt. Soil is the resource. Dirt is soil that is moved out of place. It's disjointed. It's been eroded or bucket scooped or bladed, like with a bulldozer, from where it naturally was generated or deposited, in the case of deposited soils, and it's placed somewhere else to do something, like an earthwork, a dam, a berm, something like that. So the Campus Lake Path is paved with improved surface all the way around, but we've all been on trails that have zero paving on them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Well, the carrying capacity of a dirt surface trail managerially is a lot lower than a path, the exact same path, after that same path has been covered in tar and chip or concrete. It's the same facility. It has the same physical capacity. It's the same number of miles or meters or feet of trail. But it's a completely different social experience when you pave a trail versus leave it as unimproved or primitive dirt surface. Okay? We talked about what primitive was, or what that means on Thursday. So we get this sense of, okay, the habitat's the same, but we're modifying it specifically for recreation purposes. That's a managerial carrying capacity move. After it rains, or while it's raining, we can use this with thousands of people a day. Zero ecological consequence, because we have physically separated people off of the surface of the earth with about a 2-3 inch thick layer of tar and chip over graded and compacted subbase. Okay? We'll talk about what some of those specifics are if you're not familiar with subbase and crowning roads and stuff like that. That's more the senior level class stuff. Like, how do you actually build 500 miles of trail and not have to do it all again the next year? Okay? But somebody's got to sit down and be the decider on, okay, are we going to pave this thing? Or are we not going to pave it? If we do pave it, we're going to do tar and chip, we're going to do concrete, we're going to do something else. Like geoblocks, interlocking, basically cinder blocks that you sink into the soil surface, and you can drive off-road trucks over that, even in saturated, like filled with water soils, all day long. And the geoblocks are kind of taking that impact of those knobby tires all day long, no big deal, right? Lots of different options managerially to get stuff done. But each one of those, because this is management and nothing comes out perfectly, each one of those is a trade-off. Do we spend a ton of money and fix the problem for 50 years? Do we spend a little bit of money, kick the can down the road for 3, 5, 7 years maybe if we're lucky? Do we keep this trail surface in natural surface or unimproved surface, dirt, soil, and have to do some changes? We can't have 10,000 people going on this trail during or immediately after a rain. Why? What's the managerial carrying capacity trade-off that we're making, which is going to push our carrying capacity way, way, way down on a dirt surface trail in an environment where it rains? And on most areas on the surface of the earth, it rains sooner or later. So this is a real choice, yeah? Why would a dirt surface or mud surface trail not be able to handle 10,000 people a day immediately after a good hard rain?
Well, there's going to be like a lot of erosion and soil removal, because since it's wet, it's getting stuck in people's shoes, and then afterwards the trail's just going to be bumpy and it's all just like footprints.
Yeah. So if soil is the skin of the planet, that rain makes that skin so soft and very, very prone to erosion, or susceptible to it. It doesn't mean automatically that we have erosion, right? Most of the erosion that is happening as a function of recreation is happening on this tiny fraction of a percent of the total land area of Campus Lake and the surrounding woodlands, okay? It's not happening rapidly or aggressively as sheet erosion across most of this space. The soil is pretty stable, right? If it wasn't, it wouldn't be here anymore. Make sense? Cool. So, managerial carrying capacity is the sense of, oh man, we gotta make some hard choices and trade-offs. What's our budget? What's our demand? Do we have 10,000 people a day who want to use this trail? If so, then yeah, we probably gotta bite the bullet and pay for a road crew to come through here and use specialized equipment to build us a pedestrian road, basically. Managerial carrying capacity is, how am I gonna improve, hopefully, or trade off any of the other carrying capacities to accomplish the mission of providing whatever space you're working with as a high quality, long-term sustainable, safe, and ecologically functional space. For some kinds of forest and outdoor recreation, getting super muddy and moving some dirt is part of the fun. Anybody think of a kind of forest and outdoor recreation activity where you might be throwing up big rooster tails of mud or getting mud all over yourself?
I don't know if dirt biking would count.
It's almost like dirt is in the name. Yeah, dirt biking. That's good. That's good. Yeah. All right. How about mudding? What is mudding? You don't say the hard G on mudding unless you want to out yourself as like not a mudder. What's mudding? Anybody know?
Big bowler, big old truck of someone's back pasture.
Yeah, I'm making a bunch of mud.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. There's similar activities that are a little bit more niche, like swamp bogging or swamp tractoring, where you put tractor tires on an old Suburban, right? So you have like a 6-foot tire diameter and a whole bunch of air in those tires, and you can just sort of drive out into the water, but it's also the muddy soil underneath. And in the process, you're creating 6-foot deep furrows or trenches or ditches, hydrologically speaking, in that very slow-flowing swamp environment. This is a huge ecological problem, kind of right on the border of Florida and Georgia, just like that band, Florida-Georgia Line. There's a whole bunch of swamps there. Anybody know the big famous swamp at the Florida-Georgia Line? Okefenokee. All right. And right outside of Okefenokee, which is a wilderness area, so no mechanized like power, gasoline-fed activities allowed inside that space. Right next to that, there's some more swamp. And in that space, hell yeah, man. Drop rear and floor low and see where you can get stuck, right? That's what the winch is for. Like, why would you buy a Jeep with a winch and spend 20 grand tricking out your Jeep if it's not going to get stuck? Like, we don't want these to be like pristine, clean Jeeps, you know? It's like the point is to use them and get some ridiculous story like, so there I was, upside down, water filling the cabin compartment. I looked over at my best friend and said, this is the best day of my life. And then we fist bumped before the water level rose to cover our heads, right? That's where you get the story. And that kind of specific recreation experience is totally predicated. It hangs on, it requires being able to A, have the equipment, and B, have the space where you can do that, where it's legal for you to do that, where it's reasonably safe for you to do that, and so on and so forth. Okay? So, sometimes the managerial carrying capacity has to take a look at what's the demand, which might be real high, and come to terms with like the biological carrying capacity, the ecological carrying capacity. Those are interchangeable terms. Where the biological carrying capacity is really, really low in the face of very high demand. So this would be a real fragile environment, but a very popular one. Can anybody think of a place, maybe you've seen some YouTube shorts or Vines before whoever owned Vines killed that, or Instagram shorts or whatever, was in a place that was pretty ecologically fragile, and there were a lot of people wanting to be in that space, whether or not they were in the frame of that little cell phone video. Can anybody think of a example like that? Here's one to get your thoughts flowing. Has anybody ever been cave diving? This is usually a no. Really? Wow. Scuba diving in a cave?
I've done scuba diving, but not...
Okay. Yeah, so scuba diving's super fun, right? I've only been scuba snorkeling because I'm ratchet basic, all right? Cave diving is in one of the most fragile habitats anywhere on the planet. Sea caves or wet and underwater parts of caves, extremely, extremely ecologically fragile. One person going through and scuba diving in a cave and leaving chemicals or leaching chemicals off of their skin or body, like sunblock, for example, or bug spray. Those impacts can remain in that cave system for thousands of years. That one person's trip remains detectable for thousands of years. Unless we're recording like closed circuit camera footage of somebody walking along this path, there's no trace of your trip around Campus Lake as long as you stayed on the path the instant you step off the path, right? You're ecologically invisible on a paved path like this, more or less. But in cave diving, well, that's a lot of fun. It makes for some pretty sick or fire edits. So there's a bunch of people who want to do it. And there are relatively few caves where you can access them with scuba equipment and have an interesting, meaningful trip. And the people who will survive that trip and get back out is a really short list. So we have ecological fragility, very low carrying capacity, very high demand. We want to, in all of these cases, not just cave diving, in all of these, where demand outstrips the capacity, not the supply, but the capacity, we need to change something on our management approach. So there's lots of ways to do that. We can slap a permit requirement on it. Have any of you guys ever had to get a backpacking permit, or a camping permit, or a hunting tag, or a driver's license, or anything like that? Yeah. You've just been managed. Okay? Depending on the state, depending on the species that you want to hunt, or fish, or trap, or whatever, it might be free, like a varmint tag. It might be hundreds or thousands of dollars for something like moose tag in Vermont, as of about 2010, was $700 or $800. So you paid that in, and you were buying into a lottery. It was not even a guaranteed thing. So you might be spending $700 like a lot of times before your name gets drawn. And there's lots of ways to make that more fair and more appealing and stuff like that. But there's just not that many moose in Vermont. They're huge ungulates. They're 7 feet high at the shoulder, full grown. And it takes a lot of habitat to bring up one moose. So that's a thing. So we can tweak, we can protect, we can respect, or work within the constraints of the other three carrying capacities with all of the strategies, the high-level sort of mindsets, and the tactics, the low-level day-to-day stuff of being a park ranger through managerial carrying capacity. Make sense? All right, cool. Let's keep on walking. See if we can find some shade. So, where we are right now is called front country. We're going to segment conceptually all areas for recreation into front country and back country. And it's pretty much what it says on the label. Front country has services like paved roads, and there's Wi-Fi accessible out at the Bucky Dome here for some reason. There are flush toilets within screaming distance of this spot if you need to have sort of like a high-speed unplanned come apart halfway through class. You can run over to one of the dorms or something and get the business taken care of, right? That's front country. Lots of services, lots of hardscape, right? So hardscape is a particular kind of landscape that has been hardened against impacts like roads, parking lots, buildings, picnic shelters, and so on. That's all a part of front country. So, most of the people that we think of as park rangers are front country rangers. We spend a lot of time around the visitor center, around the big developed campground that might have 150 spots. And it might even have Wi-Fi these days, and so on and so forth. Okay? Front country is what most kind of weekend warrior recreationists kind of need to be safe and effective. And that's not patronizing, it's just a fair assessment of what's the gear, the social capital, like the connections to information among friends. Hey, make some space for everybody on the path. Cool. And so forth, to have a nice half-day trip on the Shawnee, for example, close to here, or a nice walk around the path. We gotta have parking lots near the path so we can bring our vehicles and not have to walk to the path and spend an hour and a half just getting here. And then we can enjoy an hour and a half of walk around the 2-mile lake loop if you're really ambling slowly. Okay? So, front country, lots of services, quick, easy, safe to use. Very expensive to manage, set up, maintain. Okay? National Park Service, as of, I don't know, a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, had an $11 billion maintenance backlog for their facilities. That is the hardscape, the front country buildings, and outdoor structures, and so forth. Okay? That's since been addressed by Congress, but 11 with 9 zeros after it is a big number. That's a lot of patching roofs and redoing electrical conduits and running data cables to ranger stations and stuff like that, so it's all networked, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Backcountry is what a lot of us tend to think of as the forestry interesting parts. The wilderness area, which cannot have roads in it unless the road was there before the wilderness area is. That's called an inholding or enclave. Okay? Backcountry is where you can expect, hopefully, to access solitude. Okay? So, solitude, just as a quick sub-definition, is loneliness that you choose as a positive thing for good reasons. Sometimes you just need to get away from your dorm mate. I hope it's all going well for you with your dorm buddies or your apartment buddies if you're an upperclassman or whatever. But sometimes you just need to not be in constant social contact with people. And so solitude is the value that you're trying to access when you got that itch to get away from everybody, especially if you're a strong introvert like me. Okay? Some of us are ambiverts, some of us are extroverts, and we get charged up by seeing and interacting with other people, it just amps up the energy in the room. And for some of us, that's really draining. So, solitude is a positive thing. Loneliness is a very bad thing. If you are in the backcountry and you're feeling lonely, you might be in danger because you're thinking differently when you're experiencing loneliness. You're choosing things differently when you are lonely, and that has safety repercussions when you're in the backcountry trying to keep yourself alive. Sound good? All right, so front country versus backcountry. There are rangers who spend their entire professional careers working essentially full-time in backcountry. And by full-time, I mean 24/7 for up to the entire season at a time. So in some of the Alaskan parks and refuges and forests and so forth, it is an honest-to-God ranger job to get dropped off by a helicopter in the middle of a multi-million acre or hectare wilderness area and get crates of food and a whole bunch of deep cycle RV batteries to set up for your little tiny grizzly bear electric fence and some shotgun shells and so forth. And then your whole job for the next 4 months typically is the summer season there instead of 6. Hiking around, doing ecological restoration work, contacting visitors that are backpacking through that space, checking in, making sure they haven't been eaten by grizzly bears and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work. You are hiking through a trailless place in some cases for months at a time. For some of us, that sounds like pure unmitigated hell. Where would I recharge my Beats by Dre headphones out in the wilderness? You're not. Okay, you can carry a solar panel, but it would take forever. All right, the solar panels are heavy and fragile. Not good for the south central Alaskan rainy short summer. Okay, and for other people, that backcountry oriented career sounds perfect. Yeah, seeing any other human being maybe once every 10 days or so on a busy summer? Okay, I could get into that. I'm a solo, self-supported, self-sufficient kind of person. I like listening to lots of audiobooks, right? So, there are meaningful and big differences between front country and backcountry. And most of us, by virtue of eventually wanting to not work anymore at 4:30 p.m. each day, most of us end up working in some kind of a front country context. All right, so that's what I mean when I'm talking about front country versus backcountry. Accommodations can be one of two things formally for forest rec management. Accommodations are one, things like lodging. Accommodations are the services you're providing to visitors to help keep them safe and comfortable. So, every major national park, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, all the other crown jewel parks, they have a bunch of lodges and hotels in them, and cafeterias, and you can pay somebody to throw you on a donkey or a mule or a horse and ride you down and out of the Grand Canyon So you don't have to walk down a mile and up a vertical mile and forward 10 or 15 miles each way. So you can experience the Grand Canyon even if you're not up to walking up and down the Grand Canyon, the so-called rim-to-rim hike, very famous and popular thing to do, but also, as it turns out, an extremely dangerous one. People die often at the Grand Canyon. I've seen 2 bodies extricated from the Grand Canyon, body recovery, not search and rescue, but recovery, myself personally, right? It happens a lot because it's a dangerous environment, and a lot of folks aren't used to it. So accommodations help keep the not quite used to those conditions folks safe in those conditions. Sound good? That's one kind of accommodation. The second kind of accommodation is a very specific and narrow legal term for Americans with Disabilities Act requirements for facilities. So, a paved path like this, if it is created after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act a couple decades ago, it has to be no more than a specific and shallow steepness. Why would that be? Like, it's going to make our trail really long if we have to go down a steep slope, and to make it not steep, switch back it a whole bunch. That's a lot more feet or miles of trail. Why would we have to do that according to the Americans with Disabilities Act? Make a steep trail not steep. Yeah. If grandma's in a wheelchair, you don't want that wheelchair accelerating uncontrollably down the slope, right? So we kind of laugh. I mean, it's a funny mental picture, but a lot of people have died specifically because of that. One example, Haleakala National Park. It's in Hawaii on the island of Maui. Talked about, I think, our first or second day. And it is a really steep cinder cone volcano, like 100% slope. When you blast a whole bunch of cinder high into the air and it rains back down as basically pumice sand or volcanic ash, it creates a very uniform cylinder with almost exactly a 100% slope. That is, there is as much rise as there is run. It's at a 45-degree angle, 100% slope. So, there is a road that goes up to the top of Haleakala, and there's a visitor center sort of perched on the crater rim there, these 2,000-foot cliff walls going down to the floor of the crater. It's a really scenic place. In fact, hundreds of people every morning, starting at like 2 or 3 a.m., drive from their resort down on the coast, go up that switchback, and huddle together in the literally freezing cold instead of the tropical weather they came from at the resort, so they're woefully underprepared. They're like stealing hotel blankets and stuff like that and just like shivering all together. It's COVID-tastic. They get up there and they spend like 4 or 5 hours driving in some cases to get to the sunrise up there because it's amazing. Like the clouds are forming on the Pacific down below because it's, cooler air at night. At the dew point down there, you might be 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 feet above the clouds themselves, 3,000 or 4,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. And when the sun comes up over that and turns those clouds like that bright, fiery, it's not pink, it's salmon, colored like cloudscape, man, you are never gonna forget that moment, even if you're freezing to death and super uncomfortable and so forth. So, that road, that one access road up, because it's super crazy expensive to build a 10,000 foot access road up a cinder cone at 100% slope, that road is very, very heavily used. As it turns out, one really fun thing to do, one very popular thing to do at Haleakala's Peak Visitor Center was to pay somebody in a van to drive you and your bike up 10,000 feet, unload your bike, and then they can do whatever they want. They just drive back down and go for fish tacos or something. And you ride your bike down, and there's so much elevation change, you can ride that coast and that momentum all the way out to the literal coast of the island. Okay? That sounds like a pretty fun bike ride. It would really suck to pedal up to 10,000 feet, it might take you like a day, you know? And sucking wind at 10,000 feet, not very comfortable. There's one problem. The brake horsepower and brake heat dissipation of most bicycles is not equal to a 10,000 foot, many miles long switchback descent. So imagine riding your brake on your bicycle, which is not engineered like a car brake. You can't do stuff like engine braking or downshift braking, and Jake braking. You're heating up those brakes, and then you have to make an almost 180 degree immediate turn. So what happened was a whole bunch of people melted their brakes, like turned them red hot, and then the brakes slag off, and you have no brakes. And you're going faster and faster and faster down this steep switchback road. And you have to make an almost 180 degree turn, like a 170 degree turn. And some folks couldn't do it. So they launched out into space and impacted and died. Other folks riding down bicycles down that mountain would experience a meeting of the engine block and the mind with tour buses coming up. A tour bus is a big cross-sectional target when you're zooming at it and your brakes are red hot and melted and have that weird sort of nasty burnt hair smell. Yeah. And so those people died too. So, accommodations are for making situations like that safe however you have to. In that case, the accommodation was, we can't inspect with a park service. We're like pretty thin as rangers on the ground. There's not a ton of us. We can't inspect and certify. We're not bike mechanics. We're not bicycle engineers. We're not brake engineers. We can't certify that all these bikes are going to be safe. We cannot make that safe. So, we're just going to not allow people to do that. Like, we're going to stop issuing permits to the vans accepting money to bring bicyclists up to ride down to their death. Sometimes that's the accommodation. Sometimes it's just adding an extra couple of wiggles or switchbacks on a steep section of trail to make it a shallower grade or steepness. Okay? Sometimes it's handrails. Sometimes it's paying for plumbing and a whole ass treated water supply at a more remote visitor center that doesn't have tie-ins to like the city water plant and stuff like that, so that folks have access to water fountains. Like, there's no municipal water supply at Death Valley. So when it hits 125 degrees and everybody has run out of their water hours ago, it's going to be hours before we can get somebody to definitive medical care. So sometimes the accommodation is to eat the cost of running city services, like treated water, and trucking water in to Death Valley and places like it where you can't sink a well. There's not any water down economically feasibly either. Okay? So, accommodations, one of two things. Services we provide people, and then very specifically defined, legally required services that we provide to specific, legally defined people. Sound good? Cool. All right, it's 10:48. So, let's go ahead and stop it here. We'll start walking you back so you're not late to your next class. And I'm here for questions if you have them.